In a small coastal town where the ocean breeze carried whispers of secrets and stories, Daniel lived a quiet yet fulfilling life with his mother, Margaret. Their home stood at the edge of the town, overlooking the sea, a modest house filled with memories of laughter, tears, and resilience. For as long as anyone could remember, Margaret had been both parents to Daniel after losing her husband in a tragic accident when Daniel was just 10 years old. She poured every ounce of her energy into raising him, determined to give him the best life possible despite their hardships. Daniel grew up to be a kind-hearted young man with a gentle smile that lit up any room he entered. At 28, he worked as an assistant manager at a local bookstore, a job he loved because it allowed him to share his passion for literature with others. He spent most evenings reading by the window or taking long walks along the beach, often accompanied by Margaret, who cherished these moments of bonding with her son. To many in the town, Daniel seemed like the perfect bachelor, handsome, intelligent, and devoted to his family. But deep down, Daniel yearned for something more. He wanted companionship, someone to build a future with, and someone who would make his heart race the way novels described. That all changed one sunny afternoon during a charity art exhibition held at the community center. The event showcased works from local artists, and Daniel decided to attend out of curiosity. As he wandered through the colorful displays, one painting caught his eye, a vibrant seascape capturing the raw beauty of the ocean under a stormy sky. Standing beside it was Emily, the artist behind the masterpiece. With her curly auburn hair tied loosely in a bun and paint smudges on her fingers, she exuded creativity and warmth. When Daniel complimented her work, Emily smiled shyly but confidently explained the inspiration behind the piece. They talked for what felt like hours, discovering shared interests in books, music, and travel. By the end of the evening, they exchanged numbers, promising to meet again soon. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found himself looking forward to every conversation with Emily. Whether they were discussing their favorite authors over coffee or strolling along the shoreline while watching the sunset, there was an undeniable spark between them. Margaret noticed the change in Daniel almost immediately. His eyes sparkled brighter than usual, and he hummed tunes around the house that hadn't been heard in years. At first, she was curious about this newfound joy in her son's life. When Daniel introduced Emily to her during a casual dinner at home, Margaret couldn't deny the girl's charm. Emily was polite, engaging, and clearly cared deeply for Daniel. Yet, beneath her warm demeanor, Margaret felt an unfamiliar pang of unease creeping in. For years, Margaret had grown accustomed to having Daniel all to herself. Their bond was unbreakable, built on late-night conversations, shared meals, and mutual dependence. Now, for the first time, she sensed a shift, a subtle distance forming as Daniel began spending more time with Emily. Though she tried to push aside her feelings, telling herself it was natural for her son to seek companionship outside their home, a nagging fear lingered in the back of her mind. What if Emily took Daniel away from her? What if their relationship meant losing the only person she had left? Despite her inner turmoil, Margaret put on a brave face, pretending to support Daniel's budding romance. She invited Emily over for tea, asked about her artwork, and even complimented her cooking skills when she prepared dessert one evening. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but inside, Margaret wrestled with conflicting emotions, pride in seeing her son happy versus panic at the thought of being left behind. Little did anyone know, this internal battle would eventually lead Margaret down a path she never imagined treading. Her love for Daniel, though genuine, was intertwined with possessiveness, a dangerous combination that threatened to unravel not only Daniel's happiness, but also the fragile harmony of their family. For now, however, the world remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath Margaret's calm exterior. Daniel and Emily continued to fall deeper in love, oblivious to the shadows lurking just beyond their horizon. This version is written in simple, basic English while maintaining an engaging tone. Let me know if you'd like adjustments or further elaboration. As the weeks passed, Daniel and Emily grew closer with each passing day. The connection deepened, blossoming into something neither of them had expected but both cherished. They spent hours talking about their dreams, fears, and aspirations, often losing track of time as they laughed or debated passionately over trivial matters. To Daniel, Emily was everything he had ever hoped for in a partner, kind, intelligent, and full of life. For Emily, Daniel represented stability, warmth, and someone who truly understood her creative soul. It seemed like nothing could come between them. But Margaret saw things differently. At first, she tried to convince herself that this relationship was just a phase, a fleeting infatuation that would fade once Daniel realized how much he relied on her presence in his life. However, as the days turned into months, it became clear that Emily wasn't going anywhere. Every time Daniel mentioned her name, Margaret felt a sharp pang in her chest, as if she were being pushed further away from her son. Her initial curiosity about Emily slowly transformed into quiet disapproval, though she did her best to hide it. Margaret began dropping subtle hints whenever Emily came over for dinner or coffee. "You know," she said one evening while stirring her tea, "marriage isn't all it's cracked up to be. People think it'll solve their problems, but it usually creates more." Daniel chuckled nervously, brushing off her comment as typical motherly advice. He didn't realize that beneath her casual tone lay a deeper intention, to plant seeds of doubt in his mind. On another occasion, when Daniel brought up the idea of traveling together with Emily during the upcoming summer break, Margaret frowned slightly. "Traveling sounds fun, I suppose," she remarked. "But don't you think it's better to focus on your career right now? You've got so much potential at the bookstore, and promotions don't wait for anyone." Again, Daniel dismissed her words, attributing them to her protective nature. After all, Margaret had always been cautious about big decisions, especially ones involving change. Emily, however, started noticing the tension. She couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but there was an undercurrent of unease whenever she interacted with Margaret. It wasn't overt hostility. Margaret was polite, even friendly, but there was something distant in her demeanor, as though she were holding back. One afternoon, after helping Margaret carry dishes to the kitchen, Emily mustered the courage to ask, "Is everything okay between us? I feel like maybe you're not too thrilled about me dating Daniel." Margaret froze for a moment, caught off guard by Emily's directness. Then, forcing a smile, she replied, "Oh dear, of course not. Why would you think that? I just want what's best for my son, that's all." Though her tone sounded reassuring, her eyes betrayed a flicker of discomfort. Emily nodded politely, deciding not to press further. Deep down, though, she sensed that Margaret's feelings toward her weren't entirely positive. Despite her growing suspicions, Emily chose to remain patient. She believed that Margaret simply needed time to adjust to the idea of Daniel having a serious relationship. After all, mothers are naturally protective of their children, aren't they? Emily convinced herself that Margaret's behavior was harmless, a minor hurdle in an otherwise perfect romance. What Emily didn't know was that Margaret's disapproval ran far deeper than mere protectiveness. Each time she watched Daniel laugh with Emily or hold her hand affectionately, Margaret felt a surge of resentment bubbling inside her. She hated feeling jealous of her own son's happiness, but she couldn't help it. In her mind, Emily represented a threat, a force that could tear apart the bond she and Daniel had nurtured for nearly 3 decades. One night, after Daniel dropped Emily off at her apartment, Margaret waited anxiously for him to return home. When he walked through the door, humming softly to himself, she decided to test the waters again. "You seem really happy these days," she said, trying to sound casual. "I'm glad you found someone special. But have you thought about, well, whether this is moving too fast?" Daniel sighed, sensing where the conversation was headed. "Mom, we're just enjoying each other's company. There's no rush to make any big decisions," he reassured her. "Besides, why does everyone assume that falling in love means rushing into marriage? We're taking it slow, okay?" Margaret nodded stiffly, pretending to accept his explanation. Inside, however, her mind raced with worry. Taking it slow wouldn't stop Daniel from eventually wanting to settle down with Emily. And if that happened, Margaret knew her role in his life would diminish significantly. The thought terrified her. Over the next few weeks, Margaret continued her subtle campaign against Emily. She occasionally criticized small habits of hers. The tension between Margaret and Emily reached its peak one crisp autumn evening when Daniel invited Emily over for dinner to share some exciting news. As they sat around the dining table, lit by the soft glow of candles, Daniel beamed with excitement. "Mom, Emily," he began, his voice trembling slightly from nervousness, "we've decided to take the next step in our relationship. We're getting married." For a moment, the room fell silent. Margaret's fork clattered onto her plate as she stared at Daniel, her face pale with shock. Emily squeezed Daniel's hand under the table, sensing the weight of the announcement but unsure how Margaret would react. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Margaret spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Married? So soon?" "It's not too soon, Mom," Daniel replied gently. "We've been together for over a year now, and we know this is what we want. I love Emily, and she loves me. Isn't that enough?" Margaret forced a tight smile, though her eyes betrayed her inner turmoil. "Of course, sweetheart. If you're happy, then I'm happy for you." Her words sounded rehearsed, hollow even, but Daniel didn't notice. He leaned across the table to hug her, oblivious to the storm brewing inside his mother's mind. Emily, on the other hand, caught glimpses of Margaret's discomfort. She noticed the way her hands trembled as she picked up her glass of water and the faint quiver in her voice when she offered congratulations. Still, Emily chose to stay quiet, hoping this milestone would finally bridge the gap between them. After all, weddings were supposed to bring families closer together, weren't they? But Margaret couldn't shake off the overwhelming sense of dread that settled over her that night. As she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spiraled out of control. Images of Daniel moving out, starting a new life with Emily, and leaving her behind haunted her mind. She imagined holidays spent alone, birthdays forgotten, and phone calls becoming fewer and farther between. To Margaret, marriage wasn't just a union between two people. It was a threat to everything she held dear. By morning, her fear had hardened into anger. How could Daniel do this to her? Didn't he understand how much she had sacrificed for him? All those years of working extra shifts, attending parent-teacher meetings alone, and putting her own needs aside, all for him. And now, he was willing to throw it all away for someone he'd known for less than 2 years. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Something had to be done before it was too late. That afternoon, while Daniel was at work and Emily busy preparing sketches for an upcoming art show, Margaret made a decision. Sitting at the kitchen table with pen and paper, she wrote down a plan. At first, it seemed absurd, even cruel, but desperation clouded her judgment. She convinced herself that she wasn't doing this out of spite but out of love. If Daniel couldn't see the truth on his own, then she would have to show him. Her first step was to hire a private investigator. Though hesitant at first, the investigator agreed to dig up information on Emily, anything that might cast doubt on her character. Margaret handed over every detail she knew: Emily's address, workplace, social media profiles, and even the names of a few acquaintances. "Find something," Margaret urged, her voice trembling with urgency. "Anything that proves she's not who she says she is." Days turned into weeks as Margaret waited anxiously for results. But no matter how hard the investigators searched, nothing incriminating surfaced. Emily appeared to be exactly who she claimed to be, a kind, talented artist with no skeletons in her closet. Frustrated and running out of options, Margaret realized she would have to take matters into her own hands. Late one night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Margaret sat at her desk with a stack of blank stationery. With shaking hands, she began writing letters addressed to Daniel. Each one contained fabricated accusations designed to shatter his trust in Emily. One letter claimed Emily had been seen flirting with another man at a cafe. Another hinted at financial troubles she was hiding from him. The final letter accused her of using Daniel purely for his income, painting her as manipulative and selfish. When the letters were complete, Margaret slipped them into envelopes and sealed them tightly. She left them unsigned, hoping the anonymity would add credibility to the lies. Early the next morning, she drove to a nearby post office and mailed them, her heart pounding with guilt and fear. She told herself it was for Daniel's own good, that once he saw through Emily's facade, he would thank her for saving him from heartbreak. Deep down, however, she knew the truth. She was acting out of jealousy and possessiveness, not love. Over the next few days, Margaret watched nervously as Daniel received the letters. The anonymous letters arrived sporadically over the course of 2 weeks, each one more damaging than the last. At first, Daniel tried to ignore them, brushing them off as cruel jokes or misunderstandings. But as the accusations grew bolder and more specific, they began to eat away at his confidence in Emily. He found himself questioning things he had never doubted before: her loyalty, her intentions, even her love for him. One evening, after receiving the third letter, Daniel sat alone in his room, staring at the crumpled paper in his hands. The words swirled in his mind like a storm. She's been seen laughing with another man at Cafe Bliss. Do you really think she's as innocent as she claims? His chest tightened with confusion and hurt. Could Emily really be hiding something from him? Was their relationship built on lies? The next day, Daniel couldn't focus on anything else. At work, he absent-mindedly stocked shelves while replaying every interaction he'd ever had with Emily. Had she ever mentioned someone from her past that could explain these allegations? Was there a side to her he didn't know about? By the time he left the bookstore, his mind was consumed with suspicion. That night, when Emily came over for dinner, Daniel finally confronted her. "Emily," he began hesitantly, his voice trembling with emotion, "I need to ask you something important." Emily looked up from the salad she was preparing, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it, Daniel? You seem upset." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Have you been seeing someone else, or talking to someone behind my back?" Emily froze, her fork clattering onto the counter. "What are you talking about? Of course not. Where is this coming from?" "I got these letters," Daniel said, pulling out the crumpled papers and spreading them across the table. Emily scanned them quickly, her eyes widening in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. These are lies, Daniel. Someone is trying to sabotage us." "But how do I know that?" Daniel snapped, his frustration boiling over. "How do I know you're telling me the truth? These letters sound so detailed, like they know things about you." Emily stared at him, her heart sinking. She had always believed their relationship was strong enough to withstand anything, but now she saw doubt clouding Daniel's eyes, the same eyes that used to look at her with unwavering trust. "Daniel, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I would never cheat on you or lie to you. Whoever wrote these letters is trying to hurt us. We can't let them win. Please, believe me." For a moment, Daniel wavered. Part of him wanted to believe Emily, to dismiss the letters as baseless rumors. But the other part, the part fueled by fear and insecurity, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "If you're telling the truth, then why would someone go through all this trouble to make you look bad?" he asked bitterly. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know who would do this, but I promise you, it's not me. If you don't trust me anymore, maybe we need to take a break until you figure things out." Her words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. A break. The thought of losing Emily, even temporarily, terrified him, but he also knew he couldn't continue living in this state of constant suspicion. Reluctantly, he agreed, and Emily left soon afterward, her heart heavy with sadness. As the days passed, Daniel struggled to make sense of everything. He replayed their argument in his mind, wondering if he had made a mistake. Emily had seemed genuinely hurt and defensive. The letters lingered in his thoughts, poisoning his ability to trust her completely. Meanwhile, Margaret watched silently from the sidelines, guilt gnawing at her conscience but unwilling to confess her role in the chaos. One afternoon, Daniel decided to visit Cafe Bliss, the location mentioned in one of the letters. If Emily truly had nothing to hide, he reasoned, then going there might help clear his doubts. As he entered the cozy cafe, he scanned the room nervously, half expecting to see Emily sitting with someone else. Instead, he found only strangers sipping coffee and chatting casually. Disappointed but relieved, Daniel ordered a cup of tea and sat by the window, lost in thought. While waiting for his drink, he noticed a familiar figure approaching him, a waitress who recognized him from previous visits. "Hey, aren't you Daniel?" she asked cheerfully. "You used to come here a lot with Emily, right?" Daniel nodded, surprised by the coincidence. "Yeah, we did. You remember seeing her here recently, with anyone else?" The waitress frowned, thinking for a moment. "Not that I recall. She usually comes with you, or sometimes alone. Why do you ask?" "No reason," Daniel muttered, feeling foolish for doubting Emily based on fabricated lies. Still, the encounter planted a seed of hope in his mind. The days following Daniel and Emily's decision to take a break were some of the hardest either of them had ever faced. For Daniel, every moment without Emily felt like a void he couldn't fill. He replayed their conversations in his mind, analyzing every word she had said during their argument. Had her voice trembled because she was lying, or because she was genuinely hurt? Was her insistence on innocence genuine, or was she hiding something? These questions haunted him day and night, leaving him restless and emotionally drained. Emily, too, was struggling. She missed Daniel more than she thought possible, but what hurt the most was the loss of trust. Their relationship had always been built on honesty and mutual respect, yet now it seemed tainted by doubt. Every time she tried to call or text Daniel, she hesitated, unsure if reaching out would only make things worse. Instead, she threw herself into her art, using painting as an outlet for her frustration and sadness. Her canvases became darker, filled with swirling storms and shadowy figures, reflection of the turmoil within her heart. Margaret, on the other hand, found herself torn between guilt and satisfaction. On one hand, she felt a pang of remorse whenever she saw Daniel looking lost or distracted. The sparkle that used to light up his eyes had dimmed, replaced by confusion and pain. Yet, on the other hand, part of her felt victorious. The letters had done exactly what they were meant to do. They had driven a wedge between Daniel and Emily, creating distance where there had once been closeness. Margaret told herself this was for the best, that Daniel would eventually realize how much he needed her and come back to her completely. But deep down, she knew her actions were selfish, born out of fear rather than love. As the weeks passed, Daniel began to notice subtle changes in himself. His appetite dwindled, and he often found himself staring blankly at the walls, lost in thought. Work became a chore rather than a passion, and even his favorite books failed to hold his attention. Margaret grew increasingly concerned about his well-being, though she couldn't bring herself to admit that she was the cause of his suffering. One evening, after finding Daniel sitting alone in the living room, staring at old photos of him and Emily, Margaret decided to intervene. "Daniel," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "you look exhausted. Are you okay?" Daniel sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Mom. I can't stop thinking about Emily. About those letters. What if they're true? What if I made a mistake trusting her?" Margaret's heart raced at his words. This was her chance to cement her victory, to push Daniel further away from Emily. "Sweetheart," she began carefully, "it's natural to have doubts when something feels off. Those letters might be anonymous, but they raise valid concerns. Maybe taking a step back was the right decision after all." Her words cut deeper than she intended. Hearing his own fears echoed back at him only reinforced Daniel's insecurities. He nodded slowly, feeling defeated. "Maybe you're right, but it still hurts, Mom. I loved her so much." Margaret softened, her maternal instincts kicking in despite her earlier intentions. "I know you did, sweetheart. And maybe you still do. But love shouldn't leave you feeling confused or betrayed. Real love is supposed to bring peace, not chaos." Though her advice seemed reasonable, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Why would someone go to such lengths to sabotage his relationship? Who stood to gain from breaking them apart? The questions lingered in his mind, gnawing at him like an unscratchable itch. Meanwhile, Emily continued to wrestle with her own emotions. She wanted to fight for Daniel, to prove her innocence and rebuild their trust, but she also didn't want to pressure him. She understood that healing took time, especially when trust had been broken. Still, the silence between them weighed heavily on her. One afternoon, while sketching ideas for a new painting, she received a text from Daniel. "Can we meet tomorrow? There are things I need to say." Her heart leaped with hope, but she tempered her excitement, knowing the conversation could go either way. She replied simply, "Of course. Let me know when and where." The next day, they met at their usual spot, a quiet bench overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, mirroring the storm brewing inside both of them. Daniel spoke first, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Emily, I'd spent so much time thinking about us, about everything. I wanted to believe those letters were lies, but they planted seeds of doubt in my mind. I hate feeling this way, but I can't ignore it." Profile. Quen 2.5 Max. Part 6. The truth comes out. Weeks turned into months, and the tension in Daniel's life only seemed to grow heavier. Though he and Emily had agreed to take things slowly, their relationship remained fragile, like a cracked vase held together by sheer willpower. Daniel still struggled with trust, haunted by the anonymous letters that continued to linger in his mind. He tried to convince himself that Emily was innocent, but the seeds of doubt planted by Margaret refused to wither. Margaret, on the other hand, found herself caught in a web of her own making. Her initial satisfaction at seeing Daniel distance himself from Emily had faded, replaced by guilt and anxiety. She watched as her son became quieter, more withdrawn, spending most evenings alone in his room or staring blankly at the television. His once bright spirit had dimmed, and Margaret couldn't help but wonder if she had gone too far. One evening, after Daniel left for work, Margaret decided to clean up around the house. As she tidied the living room, she accidentally knocked over Daniel's phone, which he had left on the coffee table. When she picked it up to place it back, the screen lit up. A notification popped up, revealing an open email draft. Curiosity got the better of her, and she hesitated for a moment before tapping on the screen. What she saw made her blood run cold. The draft folder contained dozens of unsent emails addressed to Daniel, all written in her handwriting. Each one was filled with fabricated accusations about Emily, detailing lies meant to poison his mind against her. Margaret froze, her heart pounding in her chest. How had Daniel discovered these? Had he suspected her all along? Panic surged through her veins as she scrolled further, noticing timestamps indicating that Daniel had accessed the drafts just hours earlier. Before she could process what this meant, the front door creaked open and Daniel walked in. His expression was unreadable as he set his bag down and looked directly at Margaret. "We need to talk," he said firmly, his voice devoid of warmth. Margaret's stomach churned with dread. She knew there was no point denying anything. The evidence was right there in his hands. Still, she tried to muster some semblance of composure. "What is it, Daniel?" she asked, her tone trembling slightly. Daniel stepped closer, holding up his phone so she could see the screen clearly. "Care to explain this?" he demanded, his voice rising with anger. "These letters, they're from you, aren't they?" Margaret opened her mouth to speak but found no words. Tears welled up in her eyes as guilt overwhelmed her. Finally, she nodded weakly, unable to meet his gaze. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I wrote them." Daniel's face contorted with disbelief and fury. "Why, Mom? Why would you do something so cruel? You sabotaged my relationship with Emily. For what? To keep me close to you?" "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Margaret cried, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to lose you, Daniel. You're all I have left. I thought if I created enough doubt, you'd realize how much you mean to me. But instead, you ruined everything." Daniel shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You destroyed the trust between me and the person I love. Do you have any idea how much pain you've caused? Not just me, but Emily too." Margaret sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I know I messed up, Daniel. I was scared and selfish, and I let my fear control me. But I never wanted to hurt you. I swear, I did it because I love you." "Love doesn't justify betrayal," Daniel snapped, pacing back and forth. "You manipulated me, lied to me, and almost cost me the best thing that ever happened to me. How am I supposed to trust you now? How can I even look at you without thinking about what you've done?" The weight of his words hit Margaret like a ton of bricks. She had always prided herself on being a good mother, someone who sacrificed everything for her child. Yet here she was, exposed as the villain in her own story. Her actions had not only fractured Daniel's relationship with Emily, but also shattered the bond they had shared for nearly 3 decades. "I'll understand if you hate me," Margaret murmured, her voice choked with sobs. "But please, don't push Emily away because of me. She loves you, Daniel, more than I realized until now." Daniel stopped pacing and stared at her, his anger giving way to exhaustion. "It's not that simple, Mom. Trust isn't something you can break and then fix overnight. Emily deserves better than this, better than us. And honestly, I don't know where we go from here." The days following Daniel's confession to Emily were filled with both hope and uncertainty. Though Emily had forgiven him, the road to healing their relationship wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, leaves scars that take time to fade. Both of them knew this, but they were determined to work through it, to give their love a second chance. Daniel started by being completely transparent with Emily. He shared everything about Margaret's deception, including the letters and his own doubts. "I should have trusted you from the beginning," he admitted one evening as they sat together on her apartment balcony. "Instead, I let fear and confusion cloud my judgment. That was my mistake, and I'll spend every day making it up to you." Emily listened patiently, her heart softening at his sincerity. "I appreciate your honesty, Daniel," she replied. "But rebuilding trust isn't just about words. It's about actions. We need to start fresh, without any lingering shadows between us. I understand, Daniel said earnestly. And I'm ready for that. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. From that moment on, Daniel made a conscious effort to prove himself to Emily. He began attending therapy sessions to address his insecurities and learn healthier ways to communicate. Each week, he would share what he'd learned with Emily, showing her that he was committed to personal growth, not just for their relationship, but for himself as well. Emily, in turn, remained patient and supportive, offering encouragement while also setting boundaries when needed. Meanwhile, Daniel's relationship with Margaret grew increasingly strained. After her confession, he distanced himself emotionally, unable to reconcile her betrayal with the image of the loving mother he had always known. Margaret tried reaching out several times, leaving voicemails and sending heartfelt messages apologizing for her actions. But Daniel ignored them all, unsure if he could ever forgive her. One afternoon, Margaret showed up unannounced at Daniel's doorstep, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Daniel," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking for." Reluctantly, Daniel let her inside, though he kept his distance, standing near the doorway instead of inviting her to sit. "What do you want, Mom?" he asked coldly. "I want to apologize for everything," Margaret said, wringing her hands nervously. "I know I hurt you and Emily, and I can never undo the damage I caused. But I swear, I didn't mean for things to spiral out of control like this. I was scared, selfish, and I made terrible decisions because of it." Her vulnerability caught Daniel off guard, but he remained guarded. "Your apology doesn't change what happened, Mom. You lied to me, manipulated me, and almost destroyed the best thing in my life. How am I supposed to move past that?" "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever," Margaret admitted, her voice breaking. "All I'm asking is for a chance to make amends. Let me show you that I'm truly sorry, not just with words, but with actions." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing, weighing her words against the pain she had caused. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, but this doesn't mean we're okay. If you really want to fix things, you'll have to earn my trust back, just like I'm doing with Emily." Margaret nodded eagerly, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Daniel. I won't let you down." Though Daniel agreed to keep communication open, he set firm boundaries. He stopped visiting her house regularly, opting instead for short phone calls or occasional meetings in neutral locations. Margaret respected his wishes, knowing she had no choice but to accept his terms. She threw herself into volunteer work at the local community center, hoping to channel her guilt into something positive. Slowly, she began rebuilding her self-worth, realizing that her identity didn't have to revolve solely around Daniel. As weeks turned into months, Daniel and Emily worked tirelessly to mend their bond. They went on dates, revisiting places that held happy memories, and created new ones together. Emily encouraged Daniel to express his feelings openly, teaching him that vulnerability wasn't a weakness but a strength. In return, Daniel supported Emily's artistic endeavors, helping her prepare for an upcoming gallery exhibition that showcased her latest paintings, a collection inspired by resilience and renewal. Their progress wasn't perfect. There were moments of frustration and setbacks, especially when old insecurities resurfaced. But each time, they tackled the issue head-on, refusing to let doubt creep back in. They reminded themselves why they fell in love in the first place, their shared laughter, unwavering support, and dreams for the future. The months leading up to Daniel and Emily's wedding were a whirlwind of excitement, hard work, and reflection. Their relationship had weathered one of the toughest storms imaginable, but instead of breaking them apart, it had forged an unshakable bond. They approached their future with a newfound appreciation for each other, determined to build a life rooted in honesty, trust, and mutual respect. Preparations for the big day brought joy, and some challenges, into their lives. Emily poured her creative energy into designing every detail of the ceremony, from hand-painted invitations to floral arrangements inspired by her favorite paintings. Daniel supported her efforts wholeheartedly, often surprising her with small gestures like bringing her coffee during late-night planning sessions or leaving encouraging notes tucked inside her sketchbooks. Together, they worked as a team, symbolizing the partnership they hoped to nurture throughout their marriage. Margaret attended these preparations reluctantly, sitting quietly on the sidelines whenever she was invited. Though Daniel hadn't fully forgiven her, he allowed her to participate in certain aspects of the wedding, such as helping choose the cake flavor or assisting with seating arrangements. Margaret seized these opportunities to prove she was changing, even if it meant swallowing her pride and accepting his boundaries without complaint. She tried not to overstep, keeping her interactions polite and respectful, though her eyes often betrayed the guilt and longing she still carried. On the morning of the wedding, the coastal town buzzed with anticipation. The ceremony was set to take place outdoors, overlooking the ocean, a nod to the beach where Daniel and Emily had first fallen in love. As guests gathered under a canopy adorned with white flowers and flowing ribbons, Emily stood nervously in a nearby tent, adjusting her veil while glancing at her reflection in the mirror. Her heart raced with excitement, but also with gratitude, for surviving the trials that had tested their love and emerging stronger than ever. Daniel, meanwhile, paced back and forth near the altar, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles on his suit jacket. His mind drifted to the journey that had led him here, the doubts, the pain, and ultimately, the redemption. He thought about Margaret, who sat quietly in the back pew, clutching a tissue tightly in her hands. Though their relationship remained fragile, Daniel acknowledged how far they had come since her betrayal. He knew forgiveness would take time, but seeing her there, willing to witness this moment despite everything, gave him a glimmer of hope. When the music began, signaling Emily's entrance, Daniel turned toward the aisle. As she walked toward him, escorted by her father, all the noise around them seemed to fade away. All Daniel could see was Emily, her radiant smile, her sparkling eyes, and the quiet strength that had carried them through so much. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, squeezing them gently as if to remind himself that this was real. The ceremony was simple yet heartfelt, filled with vows that reflected their resilience and commitment. "I promise to stand by you, no matter what comes our way," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "To protect you, support you, and cherish you for the rest of my life." Emily blinked back tears as she responded, "I promise to love you with all my heart, to believe in us even when times are tough, and to always choose you, just as you've chosen me." As they exchanged rings and sealed their promises with a kiss, the crowd erupted into applause. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden hues across the ocean behind them. It was a picture-perfect moment, one neither Daniel nor Emily would ever forget. Afterward, during the reception, Margaret watched silently from her seat, observing the newlyweds laugh and dance surrounded by friends and family. She felt a pang of regret, knowing she had nearly ruined this beautiful day. Yet, amidst the bittersweet emotions, she also felt a flicker of pride. Despite her mistakes, Daniel had found happiness, and in a way, she had played a role in teaching him the value of trust and forgiveness. Later that evening, Margaret approached Daniel cautiously as he stood near the dessert table, watching Emily twirl on the dance floor. "She looks beautiful," Margaret said softly, attempting a smile. "You both do." "Thank you," Daniel replied, his tone neutral but not unkind. "It means a lot that you came today." Margaret hesitated before speaking again. "Daniel, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. Not yet, anyway. But I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've grown into an incredible man, and I'm lucky to call you my son." Her words caught Daniel off guard, stirring conflicting emotions within him. He didn't respond immediately, choosing instead to glance at Emily.